I'm Mike Gelwer. I'm the Senior Vice President for Finance and Treasurer. Thanks for coming to the Treasurer's Town Hall today. I'm going to go through some information on where we're going with administrative and student information systems. This is the big projects that are coming out of the merger with the academic units in UMD&J, but much more than that. So I'm hoping that this will be very interactive. If you have a question, please just raise your hand along the way. But all I ask is you wait and let us get a microphone to you, because this is being both recorded and simulcasted on the web. So bear with us for that. So why do we need to do all these system things? Well, I mean, the merger itself is enough. We currently are using 2 of everything. UMD&J had a set of systems from a company called Ellucian, referred to as Banner. Rutgers had a variety of systems, many of them Oracle or PeopleSoft based, but some of them homegrown. And many of those homegrown systems have gone past the end of their useful lives and are at some risk, in fact, of not having enough programmers who know old enough code to be able to deal with that. By the way, all of the slides are going to be available on my website, finance.rutgers.edu, as well as a recording of this. So just so you know. So that by itself was enough, but as part of the strategic plan that Dr. Barchi put out last year, part of the, one of the foundational parts was more effective, more efficient operations of administrative functions, whether they be purely administrative or where they relate to student information. In the case of student information, it was also to make it friendlier, to make it more usable. I think that's a goal to have for any of the kinds of systems that we have. And this is a mechanism by which we could provide real savings. When we quit using 2 of everything and go down to 1, when do we have an opportunity to save money in terms of all the touches that are necessary now? So more efficient, more effective, better for the customer. Moving to responsibility center management requires a different budget model. Now that by itself shouldn't push us into systems, but it doesn't hurt that we can devise the systems into that budget model or around that budget model, and therefore make it work better for us. And then probably the most important is that if we are to hold folks accountable and we are to give them opportunity, those who manage businesses within the institution, whether they be academic or research or clinical or housing or food or whatever, if we don't give accessible and reliable information to them, then they cannot do their jobs well, and nor can we, as an institution, hold anybody accountable. So information for management is critical here, and I'll talk more about that as we go along. So those are the reasons why we are doing this. It's a big project, as you'll see as we go forward. And let me just give you a little information. The second day I started working here, which was October 1st of 13, there was a board meeting in Camden, and they approved what was called the Fit Gap Project. The Fit Gap Project was an effort to look at the business needs of the now combined institution and compare those needs against the offerings by both of the vendors that we had, that we owned, in essence. So we own 2 systems. Which one of them might do a better job for us? Or would they, without major customization or any customization for that matter, do what we needed to do? And reflecting that we now have a 4th mission. So in addition to education, research, and public service, we now have healthcare. And there are some differences in that. There's some specialty clinical systems, but there's other information that we need off of these core administrative systems to support a clinical enterprise. So we did this study. It was intensive, probably took a little longer than it should have. Came up with thousands of business requirements. There was some prioritization of those, but then the basic answer was, for finance HR, no gaps, no significant gaps. Doesn't mean that we can take them straight out of the box, but there's nothing really missing. We don't have anything so unique. There are some things that have to do with New Jersey tax laws, but those are configurations. Those are not customizations that would be needed. Virtually everything else was manageable, really, by either of the systems. So we chose, by looking at the potential both of development and scale of the two that we had, and concluded that we would standardize on Oracle's finance HR solutions. And in some cases, we would use best of breed for certain specific types of functions. Now here, I'm not referring to the ones that we have right now, because the ones we have right now are missing pieces. The orientation is not around responsibility center management. There's a whole lot of reasons to say, even if we choose Oracle's offerings, that we need to re-implement. So we need to re-implement as much for legacy Rutgers units as we do for the new units that came in from UMD and J. So we are starting, in essence, from scratch. And I think that's an important principle to understand coming forward here. When it comes to student information systems, that's a different story. And the conclusion here was to seek the best commercial package that was available, concentrate on the business process fixes that are needed in that area. There are too many different ways of doing the same thing right now in student information systems or in student services. So we do admissions drastically different between the three major universities here, but we also do them within the schools, within one of the institutions, like here in New Brunswick. And those things were identified in a report that was done back in 2011 and validated through an additional report that got into the needs of RBHS for student services and said you really need to concentrate on getting the right functions, organization, structure, and business processes in the student service functions throughout the entire university. It was made even more interesting because of the medical or the healthcare entities, because they have a dramatically different set of admissions requirements and terms and a multitude of different programs. So the conclusion here was pick a package, but put it aside for now and work on the business processes, work on the organizational design. This is also the area, though, we carry significant risk, and that is because the primary student information system at legacy Rutgers units is a homegrown system in an old language. It is increasingly difficult to find people who can work on it. They're retiring, some of them are dying. I mean, it is an old language, and it is going to cause us a lot of risk until we replace it with something that can be supported. The other side of it that's a risk, and this was referred to in the strategic plan as well, was that the functions are not particularly friendly, meaning they're not really oriented towards the way that a student or a parent would, or for that matter, the faculty would approach it today. And so another reason for us to get out into a different package. But again, we need to pay attention to the business processes and those functions there with an eye towards the customer, the eye towards the student as a customer, or in certain the functions, the faculty members as customers. I already did that. So a theme here. So there's a general theme that before we really touch the software, we need to pay attention to how we do our business. And we need to pay attention to how it is organized. Now again, by virtue of the merger, we would need to do that anyway, because we have, as I mentioned, two of everything. And in many cases, we have put offices together because of those two systems as is. They haven't yet been really worked through in terms of saying, okay, what's the best way of doing X or the best way of doing Y? Where should we be doing it? Who is our primary customer? How is it best done? We have had two projects started in doing these kinds of reviews, the first one being procurement services. That was done last year. It was the first out of the gate. It came up with a whole slew of different organizational process and contracting recommendations, and we're working to try to put those into place right now. But it really does require changing how the department works, as well as physically relocating them in the same place. That's the other problem with the way that we've done the merger, is that we've pretty much ended up with offices physically separated. So the controller's office consists of the legacy Rutgers office on the Bush campus and the legacy UMD&J office on the 4th floor of Liberty Plaza downtown, New Brunswick. And that is both a management and an organizational issue that we need to deal with. But the first thing was, what should we be doing? Who should it be being done by? And then how to do it. So in general, we are going to review the administrative business processes throughout the functions that are associated with this system and come up with the right practices for the combined Rutgers, the new Rutgers. We're going to use the system as a way to suggest what those could be. So the certain way that Oracle might do a function, or it could be configured to do a function, starts us off. But we're really going to focus on those functions throughout each of the administrative areas. The second one that has been going on, and you might have seen emails for this, is research administration. So there's a company, Huron Consulting Group, that's in right now, and they've done a first round of recommendations regarding how to make research administration work better and how to combine the different ways that they're being done into one way. Again, with a focus on the customer, there being the faculty who do the research, and for that matter, the sponsors who give us the money. So it's well along its way, and piece of it is both the business processes, how the organizations that support research are put together, and then what is the technology overlay that ought to be done to make it work the best, again, from a customer perspective. So new organizational designs for service functions are critical to eliminate duplicative efforts. We have a lot of the same things going on between departments, schools, and central functions. That could be streamlined or at least made electronic. Improving the quality, I think that has to be a goal through here, that we improve quality of these services, we improve quality of the work coming through. We reduce the number of times something is touched. We, like every institution, have horror stories of something that requires 12 sign-offs to be processed, and those have to be rationalized. And enhancing customer service. And here in each of these projects, we are explicitly saying, who is your customer? Identify your customer. Identify the needs of those customers first. Customer is often a dirty word in higher education, but it isn't dirty here. For any of these functions, including the student information systems, they are the customers. We identify them, we focus on the needs. How do we get them to doing their research faster and better? How are we getting somebody registered faster or better? How are we getting somebody through the student accounting process faster and better? All those are questions we have to ask before we even touch the software. So as we go through these processes, some will be dependent on technology, but many of them won't. Any of them that can be done by changing the process or doing something now or relocating the offices, many of which are being planned to be relocated, will do. Any of the organizational changes that are necessary, will do. And then another set of themes that you'll hear throughout this whole talk and anytime I'm talking about this is that there are many reasons projects like this fail. And trying to address them up front so that we have much less opportunity to do that. And these are three things that continuously fall to the back end of projects, typically, when projects are not doing well. Change management. We're going to change everybody's world. There's not a single person in this room who won't experience a change or changes from this system. Even if it's simply how do you get your payroll advice will change. How do you interact with HR? That'll change. So everybody will be touched by this. So we need to pay really close attention to how to familiarize people with that change and make it's never comfortable, but it can be made more comfortable, or it can be made understandable. There are those who compare change management to a grieving process. You have to go through all the stages before you can come out the other end better. And I think that is really good point. And many times in change management, people pay attention to the people who are having the hardest trouble changing. And the reality is that with people in change, it's a bell-shaped curve. And there's a group of people, maybe 10%, who are never going to be able to manage in the change. And there's probably another 10% who are, they're the champions. They're in. Anything anything you want to do, they're in. But we pay too much attention to, in projects, and this is my fourth, maybe fifth project like this, pay too much attention to the ones who can't change, or too much attention to the ones who are right in there, and not enough to the people in the middle. So good change management these days are skills to be learned, and to focus in on the middle there, and focus on getting people to the point, what's been said to me, if you can get people to a state of confusion, then you can get them into a state of learning. You can get them into a point at which they're going past frustration and now trying to figure things out. And what are our ways of getting people there? What are our ways of them getting people to get out of that state of confusion and get more comfortable? So that's something that we're hiring. We're looking to hire a change management expert up front and have that person do quality control as we're doing any interactions with outside firms who are helping us implement. Second is communications. You can never communicate enough on these kinds of programs. And every time you think you've communicated enough, you need to do some more. You need to do it such that people are just sick of it. But that it captures enough interest so that people see it. So we're presently also looking for a communications officer on this project, someone who will cover all the aspects of the project, may have other people who help, but at least will provide a constant theme or a style or a way of communicating so that it can be expected and understood. And then last but not least, training. Training is always a way to make a project fail. And one of the things about training that I've learned years after years after years, you can plan it as perfectly as you want. You can have as many workshops as you can possibly get, and it doesn't really matter till the day you turn it on. So everybody can be a little bit familiar with it or even a lot familiar with it, but the day you turn it on, it's new game. So more training now is just in time. More training now is your own access to it, having resources that are available on the web or somehow to you right away. One of the best techniques that I've seen is where you have times like this. Get together in a room, bring your problem, bring your work. Have experts in the room to actually work through it. You know, that takes time, but it's time well spent. And then you start to get progress throughout the organization. Training is something that we need to focus on up front. And it's not just for the people that are working here on the first day, it's the people who start working at Rutgers on the second day. How do we bring new people into it who will have had no exposure to 3 or 4 years of all the stuff around these projects? So those are essential for achieving success. We're looking for those resources before we start to touch software. And I think get plans in place that make sense, work through with other entities that are involved like HR or dean's offices or local champions that we can align with and do the best we can to try to avoid the pitfalls that other institutions, including ones that I've worked on, have hit before. I always like to say I want to make new mistakes. I don't want to make somebody else's mistakes that they've already figured out. Let's go for new ones all the time. I usually get a laugh about that, but I guess not today. So these are principles. This is something I lifted from, I don't remember who I lifted it from. Huron, I think. Somebody. One of the consulting firms said, focus on these things, and in this particular order. First of all, focus on people and structures. How are people put together here? How are the organizations set up? Who's doing what? What's the best way to make that go? Focusing on the business processes, that's pretty clear. Focusing on the impact of those services on internal and external customers. Not always thought through. Not always thought through. That has to be up front here too. How are we going to measure our performance? Apply metrics. Only way you can learn is by measuring and by using that as a basis to improve. And then finally, the technologies employed. The technologies are well worn, they're good, but we got to do the other work before we touch them. Too often you want to play with the software, get it running, make it wonderful and snazzy, and you haven't done the other work. So hopefully we will avoid that. So some things about this project. First of all, it's going to be a multi-year project. From beginning to end, probably 5 years to take. It's because it's big. It's merging 2 cultures. It's merging multiple cultures, really, within Rutgers itself, when you consider the differences between Camden, Newark, New Brunswick, and the health sciences units. So we need to bring that together. It's going to take that kind of time. Guided by business process improvement, organizational review, I've already talked about. Bringing best practices using the software model and using experience from others who have used the software or have done these kinds of things before us. As with the RCM project, we can gain a lot of experience from people who have done this recently or are currently doing it, but they're ahead of us a bit. Good example is Penn State University is working on a new student information system, and we're going to track them all the way through how they're doing on that project, because they can help us avoid their mistakes and help us understand what worked well. Alignment with the RCM budget model, that is one of the principles up front. If it doesn't support that management model, then we failed. If we cannot provide the information that's needed to the chancellors, the deans, the directors, whoever is involved in managing the core enterprises, then we failed. So we're not going to fail. And then the emphasis on those things that I mentioned before. So this is a summary of how it might work. And this is assuming things fall into place appropriately, but this is how it could certainly work. We're in phase 0 right now, what I call the predecessor projects. That's where we worked on the business requirements. That's where we have been working on an implementation strategy, what comes in what order. And we've been working on a reporting strategy as well. So certain data need to come together for us to manage. We've been working on that. Certain principles around what do the managers throughout the organization need to manage their business, their line. Those have been collected or worked on and so on, and need to now be really worked through more definitively. This is the phase that we're in right now, what I call foundational projects. So first of all, we'll be doing this business process reengineering for finance, HR payroll, and student. So that'll be going on in this stage. We have had RFPs on the street for assistance in the HR payroll area and on the finance, the accounting functions. And we'll have one going out very shortly in student. The first one going out will be around how do we do financial aid, followed quickly by registration and enrollment and so on. So working up, there's some work going on in IT infrastructure. This is important to the project overall. The main one there that impacts it is going to a single email and calendaring system. We really don't want to have a new set of administrative systems interface with what are now 200 plus email systems throughout the institution. On top of that, managing 200 email systems across the institution is crazy to begin with. So getting to a single email system and calendaring system so that things can be scheduled throughout the place is one of the key pieces there, along with some work that's going on in the data centers. As far as students concerned, we'll be picking which student information system package that we want to go forward with. There are 3 primary vendors in the market. We're actually using business requirements that we've gathered here and some help, again, from Penn State, who went out in the street on this recently and can assist us in understanding what to look for. And then these are the big projects right here. HR payroll, we're going to be moving all employees to a single HR payroll system. More specifically, we're going to be moving the RBHS employees who are now on Banner onto the current PeopleSoft system. Why are we doing that? Because we want to upgrade from one system, not from 2. And the PeopleSoft system is capable of mimicking the processes or the structures of the Banner system. And bringing them over allows us to start from one platform. So that is a big piece of work right there, but it's a very focused piece of work. We're not going to do a lot of other improvements, bells and whistles. I know that there's improvement that's needed. That's another phase. But instead, getting everybody onto one good working payroll system is the goal there. In the finance area, though, we're going down to the foundations, and I'll talk to you about that in just a minute and give you more specifics about that. Phase 2 would start roughly in beginning of 2016. This is after we will have done a lot of work on HR payroll business requirements and organizational things. And at this point, we will upgrade the HR part, not the payroll part, but the HR part of the system. We're going to, in this case, go to HR in the cloud, if you will. It'll be a cloud-supported, mobile-supported, very interactive system. And sometime in the near future, we'll run some demos of that just to get everybody some idea of what to expect. But it's pretty cool. And then we'll be deploying the BPR, the setups that have going on there. And in phase 2, we'll also complete the student services things. There's still some IT. Payroll waits until the following year. Why is that? Because you don't You don't do a payroll system till you're absolutely ready. We can decouple the two. We can keep it running just fine, even though it's plugging it into a new HR system. And then when we have tested it and tested it as much as we think we need to, and then test it 2 times more after that and get it right, then we'll flip over to it. We are not going to screw up the payroll. So that's why we're not moving it until we're completely ready. And in 2017 is when we'll also start the student services first round. Student services is going to be the most difficult to schedule implementation because it's all dependent on a cycle that runs through the year. If you think about an admissions cycle, and I don't mean just undergraduate, if you think about all the programs we have, an admissions cycle followed by an acceptance cycle, followed by a registration, followed by a billing, followed by a collecting, followed by a, whatever. Those have to be hit a certain sequence, and if you're not ready on one of those, then you have to fall back to where you were before. I don't think saying that we can't do recruiting for undergraduate students, we have, because the software isn't ready, is quite an acceptable answer to anybody. So they'll be ready when it's ready, but we think that'll be around 2017. And it'll probably take until through 2018, maybe even longer, to do all the pieces given those cycles. So this is the general thing. I wanted to give you a feel for some of the details of Phase 0 and Phase 1, and then you can look at the slides at your leisure for Phase 2, 3, and 4 later on. Phase 0, we did the fit gap, I talked about that. We've done this financial reporting consolidation exercise here. And what that did was take the information from the 2 general ledgers, merge it, and relate it to one another. So in other words, make it comparable, such that for an entity that had one of each, we can start to produce financial reports in the same form. More importantly, we can make a school in one part of the institution, well, I'll use the specific example, the school pharmacy. School pharmacy is part of RBHS, but it's running in the old Oracle accounting system, getting its reports in that fashion, which are completely different from the other RBHS schools that are in Banner. Well, we need to give one comparable set of reports for pharmacy as well as Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. So we have taken a system that's been used in commercial purposes for mergers and acquisitions and applied it to our own merger acquisition here. So this is something that's been useful. It's also allowed us to look deeply at the chart of accounts and reporting needs. And this is a starting point, but this is probably the biggest piece of work you do with any new financial system. And I'll show you an example in a few minutes of where it's landed, just to get a feel for what we're thinking about in terms of reporting. Financial close is this is where the big business processes and organizational work within accounting are taking place. Rutgers never closed its books except once a year. UMD&J closed its books every month. It's amazing that Rutgers never closed its books, but once a year. So we're going to start going to monthly closes. We're going to be able to produce fully vetted financial information throughout the organization, which will also allow us to do high and medium level P&Ls and balance sheets throughout the organization, which is something that is terribly difficult to do now. There's work going on the research pre-award system. This is now tied in with the research administration project I referred to before. This is a great piece of work that is really needed, again, to pull the 2 sides of the house together. A reporting strategy for all projects, what are the management requirements and the support, how do we design this thing, and what are the tools we use, and the training strategy. And we're looking for a reporting strategy that affects what I think of as 4 different levels of users. There are some users who all they need is a dashboard on their desk, something that shows up once a day or once a week, and gives the key information for what they need to manage their part of the institution. Yeah, so that's one level. The next level is somebody who needs a canned report. You know, I just need this report for my units whenever I want it. And that's fine. That's going to take care of a lot of needs throughout the academic areas and some of the other business areas. And so that should be available from a library. Here's the different slicing and dicing that's available to you. It's tied in with your information for your role and is available to you on the screen right then and there. Then there are those who need to do a little bit of analytics. And I distinguish that from somebody who needs to do a lot of analytics. So we need tools that allow somebody to take that canned report, make a few adjustments to it, keep it for themselves. That's their thing to work with. That precludes them needing a shadow system of their own. And then finally, we have the tools that we need for the folks who really have to dig into data. And there we need a very sophisticated set of tools and allow for data management to let them go whole hog. And we know a lot of those people, and we need them. We need to be able to provide those capabilities. So rich data, understandable data, related across the institution, you know, common definitions, and then tools whereby we can access it, you know, by combination of those four roles. We're establishing this project management office. We've just hired the project executive. We're looking for a change management specialist. We're looking for a communication specialist. We'll soon be looking for the training specialist. I said we needed to do that up front, so we better have them here before we go too far down the road. And then last but not least, this is something that's going on right now and out of facilities, Tony Calcado's shop. With the combination of facilities across the legacy Rutgers and the addition of U and D and J units, we had as many as 10 space management systems on day one. And that's not sustainable. So we're going to a single system, the Integrated Workplace Management System, that will both deal with how is the space defined. So literally it will have CAD drawings and calculations and identifying who is in what room and what are they doing. So, and that's because it'll be interactive with departments to be able to go in and keep those data up. It will also capture all the data for different types of maintenance that are required in a building, different capital projects that are required in a building, any of these kinds of things. It'll be our subledger for space management. Very interactive, very helpful. It will not only drive, be available for understanding space and its utilization, it'll be used for the calculations for responsibility center management and be used for our facilities administrative cost report that we have to do to the federal government next year. So it'll be one system that pulls all those data together. And the project is going very well, should be live this spring, should be available this spring. And again, it will be interactive with departments. Your space, everybody will be a guardian or a overseer of their space and the data that are in it. So that's phase 0. Phase 1, this is, I talked about these in general. What are we doing in financial management? Well, we're going to a cloud-based financial system as well as an HR one. So it will be hosted outside of the university. It will be based on common principles that software has in the cloud. It'll be accessible via mobile devices as well as desktop devices. It's going to be pretty rich in terms of its capabilities. If you are part of financial management organizations, you'll have a very tight interaction with this system. What is going to be even more needed is, well, everything's needed here, project accounting and grants management. We have a homegrown system currently that interfaces with the general ledger. It is, again, another one of these that's end of life, not very friendly, needs a lot of work. The system has inherent capabilities in it for grants management and project accounting. We in fact had those already, but they weren't turned on. The project ran out of steam and money last time, and they weren't turned on. So therefore, by having it turned on in this new system, we will get a capability on grants review that this can't have now, including the kind of reporting that we need out of that. Some really good reporting needs have been identified in the Huron project, and this will lend itself to that. Other things that are important for the overall university is accounts receivable, cash management, treasury functions. Again, things that were in the old system but not turned on. So we need those functions just to run a good finance shop here. It's a foundational project because all the other stuff builds up on top of the financial system, whether it be the HR payroll system or the student information system, all needs to land right here. This project just got started, and this is to provide interactive budget tools to every unit that does any kind of budgeting. It is based on the foundational work that we did this past year to pull the data together and re-relate it in terms of UMD&J data and legacy records data. But, and a key element that we'll have both here and in the HR system going forward, and that is position management, position planning. It's a fundamental element of budget management, especially in RCM. It was turned on sort of at UMD&J, sort of still exists in the RBHS units, but not very efficient manner, and wasn't turned on for legacy records. So it'll come up both in the budget tools and the HR system. We want to provide tools for budget preparation and forecasting, the ability to run what-if analyses on a budget and see how that rolls up. If you go from a department to a school to a central budget, how does that work? And also, we want to move towards multiple year, not so much budgeting as forecasting multiple year forecasting. We'd like to get, and the best practice for RC models is to get into a current plus 2 year or current plus 3 year rolling model. So that at any given time you can look at the impact of a programmatic change that you might want to do. If you want to add a degree program or you're going to change a research program and see how that works its way through a forecasting model. Again, we want these tools to be useful. They need to be helpful, not just the last thing they need to do is help us prepare the university's budget. They need to be useful from the standpoint of management. How do we manage a athletic department versus a dining services versus a facility management versus a agricultural experiment station? We need to look at those things and tune to those needs. And if we do them right, then the consolidating up takes care of itself. We're also going to go to a capital planning system. This is something that has been managed well out of facilities, but needs to be captured and rolling for a good 5 years plus, and be able to tie it in with the financing options that we might have. So I need to see that from the standpoint of when would our next bond issue be? When might we go to the market for capital money? How would it fit into fundraising goals? Those kinds of things need to come into play with capital planning. And then economic model is more around where I'm looking at how do we capture information on what is it cost to educate an undergraduate student. That's the age-old question in higher education. I've been in the business over 30 years. They talked about it 30 years ago. Still haven't answered the question. We're getting to the point now where we could start answering that question. And from a policy perspective, from the standpoint of both governments and consumers out there, we better start being ready to answer that question. Why are we charging what we're charging? Where does that come from? We've done a lot of work on that realm in research. been required over the years. It's happened a lot in healthcare because of necessity, and now it's coming to higher education, the education component. We better be ready for it. So that's something that's going into place. And critically, management reporting tools out of all of that. Procurement applications, it says selection and process. We own 2 different products. One came from UMD, one came from Rutgers. They're both good. We're trying to decide which one to go with. But in essence, in this case, we want to build 2 things. One is a marketplace whereby somebody can order off of contracts out of catalogs. If you're an RBHS, you can do that now. We want to extend that, make that really Amazon-like as best we can, make it, and then really work underneath there on the contracts for best pricing, delivery, terms, whatever. And being able to understand how best to order and track this stuff. And one that I know will be near and dear to everybody is replace the Tabor process. It's phenomenal to me that this thing that there hasn't been a riot over this, okay? I do not understand why there hasn't been a riot. It was funny when it came up at the University Senate, a few weeks ago, because there was a study about this awful Tabor process, and this, we've got to do this and we got to do that, and I was able to lean over to the president and say, okay, July 1 of 16, because they're right, it's absolutely right. It's hard, and combined with expense management is a focused procurement travel card program. It is unconscionable from my perspective that we require people to use their own credit cards to carry university business. And then we take however long it is. And this is my organization, so I take the responsibility that we take days and days and days and days and days to reimburse. Crazy. It's crazy. In this day and age, there are very good travel card programs that would allow for that to be carried and accounted for appropriately. And there are ways to prevent the abuse that people are afraid of. There are very good ways of dealing with that. The technology is there. We just need to use it. In select cases, we'll go to beyond travel where needed, where we need to do fast, quick orders. Best example I've had with that is the dean of Mason Gross, who's talked to me about when they're working on sets and at 9:30 at night and needs, or something, and need to go get wood. Okay, I get that. If we do a really good job of contracting here, especially on what we buy and when we get it, delivery, that kind of thing, we'll minimize the need for this kind of card. But where appropriate, we'll do it. I mentioned this already, moving RBHS employees to the PeopleSoft system. We have to make it speak to the Banner Chart of Accounts because that system will still be running. We're trying to figure out the position management piece. Can we turn it on while we're doing this? But other than that, we're only going to do minor upgrades and cleanups so that we can get this to go. There are still differences in the work rules until all the labor negotiations and all the unions go through. There'll still be differences, and we'll account for those within PeopleSoft. But it'll still be on one system. Business process and organizational review for HR payroll, really working hard on this already. The planning's been in place, and it's on the street in terms of assistance for it. This is both HR and payroll. And in fact, we need to get to the point where the distinction there is not really concerning anybody. It's an employee, it should be an employee customer-centric model. Or if you're recruiting positions, it needs to be a departmentally centric model. So those are, again, coming back to who is the customer and address the needs of the customer. Well, IT, I mentioned that before, and then this thing here. There are phases 2 and 3. I won't get into them. They're just the details about where we're going to go, and finally 4 to finish up there. Here are the common efforts that we want to have across all the projects. I mentioned we'd have this project management office that would provide a consistent framework, an umbrella, if you will, across all of them, no matter where they're going on. Project management, critical. Sounds simplistic, but it isn't. You know, there is not a terribly good history of project management at Rutgers. It has been lately. The integration itself was a very well project managed effort. And we're picking up the experience from that and the experience from some other recent projects to say what were the right ways of handling that. And a lot of them have to do with discipline of communications, discipline of reporting, just, you know, certain things so people understood what was expected and when it was expected and how it was expected, and accountability from that. So that will be paramount in everything we do here. And multiple project managers that we'll need. Change management, I mentioned that before, the importance of that. And it really is a skill set. You know, I've gone through change management training. You can go through a morning of change management training, get techniques and methods and orientation to it. It's a set of skills. We need to teach this set of skills broadly throughout the organization. And it'll be useful for a lot more than just this project if we do a good job of it. Communications, consistent and constant. Training, multimodal. In-person webinar on demand. Ad hoc assistance is needed. A different paradigm around help desk. You know, there's a lot of change in how to perceive help desks now. I mean, good help desks start as really just online FAQs and online tools. They don't even touch a human being at a desk. When it's at a desk, you know, a call comes in somewhere, there's an appropriate way to triage it and track so that you can find what happened to it. Ongoing refresher and new skill courses, and we're really looking at certification processes to the point where if you're going to be in the HR payroll system doing certain functions, that you'll be certified for those functions before you can get in. Not sure where that's going yet, but that's part of the HR and other pieces here. And then reporting, I mentioned about the common tools, multiple levels, et cetera, et cetera. And also their help desk function. I mentioned before that we were changing the chart of accounts. We were trying to orient it towards reporting. We were trying to orient it towards responsibility centers. This looks daunting. It really isn't. It's really taking pieces, information of what we do and breaking it into chunks. And those chunks live as independent dimensions so that you can do a lot of different reporting, pivots, slices and dices of it. For most people, it'll be a whole set of numbers that you use on a standard basis, but what matters is when it flows up into a consolidation, when it flows up into analysis or so on. So examples, this is the responsibility center. We identify, you know, this school versus that school, or Rutgers University New Brunswick from Rutgers University Newark. Those are responsibility centers too. We also identify, you know, the finance division, other administrative units. That's where the code goes. Division and org are important. Org is kind of like a department. And I say kind of like because the definition of a department here is not completely clear. But through this process, we'll make it that way. And then division is a sub-level of that. And what do I mean by that? So say you have a value here. We have 2 medical schools. We have Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in New Brunswick. We have the New Jersey Medical School in Newark. Okay? Each of them have a division of gynecological oncology. Okay? So we would want to identify that division. Now, in a medical environment, you have departments and then you have subunits. And some of the subunits are as big as other departments. The best example I always give is cardiology within the Department of Medicine. And it typically is a very big department. Well, here we've got a division. However, between the New Jersey Medical School and Robert Wood Johnson, they're in different departments. So gynecological oncology, and one of them is an oncology department, and in the other it's in OBGYN. So how do we make the system distinguish that? It's a whole other question. Why they're different departments? I don't get into that. That's not my business. So this is how we're going to distinguish some of those things. It also allows us to distinguish what are the IT functions within HR, or what are the HR functions within IT, or what are the IT functions within a school. So it's a sub-level that allows for a little bit more granular analysis. Location was one that surprised me. When it first came in, we started kicking it around and said, oh, location, you mean we capture a lot of that by which of the 4 units we're talking about. Well, really here, this got into really granular because we have locations far-flung throughout the state. And now we even more so because we have a bunch of clinics all over the place. And we need to identify activities within specific locations, cities, counties, different elements within the state of New Jersey. So it's a big deal. In most cases, someone will be using, just a default code there. Oops, sorry. A default code, for where you are right now, where you normally are. But we have operations now that are all over the place, and we need to track them that way. Fund type is pretty straightforward, unrestricted, restricted, those kinds of counting terminology. There's some nuance there that's important, that's cleaning up, if you will, from where we are now. Natural accounts, these are the revenues and expenses. Again, we need some cleaning up there. In the current systems, there are some of those that are actually referring to business line and not actual revenue and expense. So trying to simplify that, and also here is where we're pulling together the reporting needs of 2 organizations into one and making sure they align. Business line, some people will hate that term, but at a top level, that's education, research, public service, and healthcare, and then it needs to go down from there. So there are tremendous needs that have been identified under this. We need to identify the undergraduate education, graduate education, professional education by degree, perhaps. That's one of the best refined items that we've seen so far. In units like, I'll use athletics as an example, we need to identify football versus basketball. We actually need to track the games in terms of reporting requirements. Not just nice things to do, but things that are required to do for that particular business. This is something that'll get, I think, in the clinical enterprise will get pretty extensive. In the research enterprise, it'll get extensive. Some work has already been done on this. It'll get better as we socialize it and start understanding people's needs. So it's a way to capture some particular thing that we do. That's the best way I can describe it. If we're running a master's degree program in, what did the gentleman give me, in governmental accounting, then that's a business line. That's something that we want to track. Activity is a little different in that this is taking into account something that might be done across multiple units of the institution. My best example here is cancer studies or cancer research. And I remember this back from my Duke Medical days back in the 90s, where if we were a National Cancer Institute core grant, had a core grant, we had to supply information about all the cancer activity, not just at the institution, not just what went through the cancer center, or in this case here, the Cancer Institute in New Jersey. So this allows us to go and label cancer activity that's throughout the institution, and there's a tremendous amount of cancer activity that was going on in Legacy Rutgers before the merger. So that can be captured using this this. It might be useful for a lot of other things. I mean, I know it'll be useful for a lot of other things. And then we provide for future growth, something we haven't thought of yet. So this is where we're going. If you think about being able to use each of these fields independently and create a report on some question, that's the goal. How do we allow for the transactions to fall into buckets that allow for good reporting to happen? And the better that we think through this, again, the better management tool ultimately it'll be. It's not about making, the controller's financial reports. You can do that without all this. It's about making the management reporting useful. So some final thoughts, things that must happen in order for us to be successful. We can make this happen. This, by the way, this is going to be an expensive project. There's just no question about it. The president has, and the nice thing about our president is he has experience from activities in the past, whether it be corporate boards or his time at Penn and Thomas Jefferson. He has experience in these kinds of implementations, so I don't have to teach him that. In fact, he's teaching me things on that. He understands this is going to be a big thing. He's kicked around $80 million ultimately on the cost of this. Now we're going to save a lot of money because there are going to be a lot of consolidations and improvements and so on. But it's a big deal. But we don't have a choice. We merged. We have to do this. And in fact, external parties are looking at us, waiting for us to do it. Rating agencies, granting agencies, the state. They didn't give us money to do it, but they want us to do it. And we can do it in an efficient and reasonable manner if we can create a tight control of the project scope, if we do that business process organizational work, and we have this strong and dedicated project office. I've said here again and again and again, reporting must have the highest priority and be planned up front. And executive management must reinforce that the implementation will have the full support of management for the project and all the associated work, appropriate levels of funding, including ongoing post-live operations. That's another place where these fail, where the spigot turns off on day 2, and then you're stuck. Support and resources match the intent, and this dedicated change management reporting and training efforts. And I continue to be pleasantly assured by the president and by the board that they understand this and support it. So I'm taking them at their word when I go to them in a few weeks and ask for the authorization to do phase 1. Questions? Let's get the microphone over there. Now, you got to do better than the newer crowd did in terms of asking questions, okay? Oh, come on, somebody, please. It wasn't that good. Good, wait, let me just we're simulcasting and recording, so we need the mic.
It's about RCM.
Hold on. Wait for the mic, please. Okay.
Thank you. Unfortunately, it's about RCM because I missed your presentations on all campuses. Is that admissible, or should I ask you privately?
No, you can ask, and I can also give you any of those presentations.
Okay. My question is specifically about RBS, the Rutgers Business School, which is spread over 2 campuses, New York and New Brunswick. I don't understand how the financials of RBS would be carried out when it crosses campus boundaries.
Pretty well, actually. I mean, we can identify the activities in each of the campuses, and what we can't do right now in this new structure, we'll be able to do quite easily. But we can identify who the students are, we can identify the work of the faculty, we can identify the classes, we can identify the space well, and we are capturing that as well as we can now, and we'll do it better when we have better.
Yeah, I guess my question was more a matter of principle. I'm sure it can be done through proper accounting. This is a case where money will cross, excuse me, campus boundaries, right? Because the enrollment, as you know, of RBS at New Brunswick is about 50% higher than that in undergrad, than that in Newark, which means a lot of the money that would be raised through undergraduate studies here will go to subsidize also Newark. Is that correct?
I don't know that that as a statement is correct. I do
The
not.
statement is correct. I saw the registration figures.
I don't have those, so I can't speak to that. I mean, that is a, there is a single business school with 2 sites. And as far as its management within the RCM model, it reports up through the chancellor at Newark.
At Newark, okay.
It is responsible to the chancellor at New Brunswick for the activities here, and it draws on services and activities in New Brunswick and pays for them appropriately.
So I guess what you're saying is that the money would be concentrated in Newark for decision-making purposes.
Now, I would say the money is concentrated at the business school, at the Rutgers Business School with the dean, who has first responsibility to the chancellor there, but a second responsibility to the chancellor here.
Okay, thank you.
I will take any other questions. They don't have to be on this. Back there. Way back at the back.
Thank you. If I understood your slide correctly, you said that with the student information systems, you're looking for perhaps an kind of off-the-shelf type package. And if so, is there any consideration or are there any sort of first tier or any packages like PeopleSoft or Banner or whatever it is that come to mind? I know you said, again, perhaps it's premature to ask that question, but are there any that are sort of...
No, it's not premature. There are 3 commercial packages that could handle the scale that we have here. There are a bunch of packages that wouldn't manage to the size of this university, and they are Ellucian's Banner product. Again, not what we have now, but what will be or what is available now. Oracle's product, now it's called PeopleSoft. It'll be an Oracle student information system. And then there is another company that is cloud-based called Workday that is gaining some traction across other larger universities. So those are the 3 targets of our RFP when we go to the street. Again, that was the experience that gleaned also from talking with our friends at Penn State. You know, one of the good things about joining the Big Ten is that we join the CIC. We have these alliances with, and we gain a lot of information. We have great sources of information of things that have been done before us at other Big Ten institutions, and we are mining that quite well right up here.
Follow up on the student information system. So I'm assuming this is a system that covers soup to nuts. It's the backup support for all student records as well as the interface. So the current sort of timing is that comes online in 2018. Is that?
It'll be between 17 and 18 as we currently think about it.
So my question has to do with improvements that we need to happen before then, or are looking at happening now. I mean. So
those are independent. If they need to happen, they'll happen through an independent stream, if you will. They're not going to be dependent on what goes on here.
All right.
Because clearly there are constant regulatory and other changes that go on that affect student information. So same as with payroll. It constantly happens, constantly changes. So we will continue to have resources applied to those projects. They're not going to get pulled off to do this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question because we have to keep going with what we're doing while we're changing things and improving that. Another reason why we have to make sure we test it and then test it some more before we turn off something that we have currently working. Other questions?
Thank you. I heard you mention the financial aid office in the business process. And in some institutions, when they implement a new student information system, they do it holistically, meaning start with admissions, move to a financial aid registration. Is that how you envision that we would roll out the different modules?
I don't think there is a particular magic order to them. And we're looking at financial aid. It has to do with consequences of the combination. I mean, we're one entity. No matter how many subdivisions we say we have, we're one entity in regards to financial aid. So for both process and system and compliance issues, it made sense to, and then we were ready to do it, made sense to deal with that one first. But it'll be followed quickly, probably the next one by enrollment, where there's some discussion going on about what belongs where between the four units. And again, we have a fairly different model in some case of some of these functions within RBHS than we do with the rest of Rutgers, simply because the difference of the different health-related programs. But it's a good question. We have to do a whole bunch of those, which is why I've given so much time in here to concentrate on it. I warn you all out? We have two in a row here.
I'm looking at this account code combination, and I'm representing continuing studies
Yes.
in the higher education centers. And we deal a lot with cross schools. So we deal with Camden, New Brunswick, Newark, different units. I was just wondering how this would apply to a higher education center, or how this would fit in there, since it is cross-campus,
Right.
cross-school.
Very good question. So that has come up once or twice. It's a really good, that was one of the impetus for the location code, so we could identify the physical higher education center. It was also either probably in the activity here as an option too, so that you could identify that while still identifying the school over here that was doing the teaching or whatever the part of the program was, and the particular org within it. So that was one of the things that came up to make this location code seem very important, is being able to identify those. Now, when we get into really beating this up, if we find that isn't working the best way to identify that, we'll rethink it.
Yeah, because rolling up,
Mhm.
so it's great for by location, but if you wanted to look at all of the partnerships off campus.
Oh, we have a trick for that too. But good, keep thinking that. Those are that's precisely the kind of thing we need to think through. How do you need to manage that business line? How do you need to do that? And so we need to be very specific about answering that question. And the beauty of doing this, we're punching it against existing data. We have time to work it through. And if we provide ourselves enough flexibility here, we have time to work it through even after we go live if we get it wrong. So as opposed to being a very hard-coded.
Hi, I actually have two questions, but
Sure.
still on the account code combination. Currently, for giving access to different individuals, we're doing it at the EBRC level for in the financial system. But with this new account code system, or the new chart of accounts, have you guys thought about how we would give access to individuals?
Yes, yes. First of all, there'll be a role-based, there'll be a definition of roles, and then there's enough security combinations between the different pieces here, we can actually put them together to constitute access. So it could be, combination of this plus this plus this. That could be, or ranges therein that could work. So yes, that's something that there's actually a lot of flexibility, maybe even too much flexibility in what you can do in a security model here.
And my second question is, you talked about looking at duplicate efforts across schools, central organizations, and departments. I mean, obviously, as you identify what those duplicative efforts are, have you thought about how you would implement removing those duplications and the staff that are associated with that? Is there a plan?
Not yet. And I think that we haven't gotten far enough into that to figure it through. I mentioned that procurement services was the first one, and we're working through what is the organizational plan there. And there are a lot of factors that go into play besides, I mean, what exists there right now are a lot of vacancies, so that gives you a lot of flexibility. But the other factor is that in many of these combined offices, we have two different unions, the Legacy UMD and the Legacy Rutgers unions, that have different perspectives on the positions. So there's a lot of things to work through. It's not easy. But that's a good question. That applies where we have the cross offices, but there are a lot of those that are impacted here. This is something that we've had a lot of conversations on with Vivian Fernandez, and we'll continue to have those, to make sure that implementation is done in an appropriate way. Oh, one more over here. How are we doing time-wise?
Thank you.
Okay.
Is there any discussion about how FTE is going to fit into the budget model, like state lines?
Mm-hmm.
Will they be monetized under RCM, or is it just we're not there yet?
Well, that's a good question because we're still trying to make sure that we're in a stable position vis-a-vis the state on those lines. For now, they're going to stay where they are. We're looking at a couple of different options in terms of how do we move forward with, position management by itself has an opportunity to be able to see them better. But that's just as a tracking tool from a management perspective. We're also trying to look at how do we get to a point where we're not necessarily have to deal with a 50% fringe rate on non-state lines at certain times, like we did last year. That's highly uncompetitive. But we're still driven by the state benefit programs, and there's a limit to how much and how fast we